56 years after an explosion that took the lives of 78 coal miners, more than 100 family members and locals gathered at the Farmington No. 9 Mine Memorial to remember those killed in the blast. In attendance at today's ceremony was West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin, a Farmington native who also lost family during the tragedy, as well as a Brazilian documentary filmmaker who came all the way to West Virginia from Florida to experience the ceremony firsthand.
One thing for me was super important. We are here in this ceremony, so 56 years passed, and this accident never ends. When one worker don't return to home, this day stay open forever. We miss this person.
November 20th, 1968, 5:30 a.m. A fire broke out inside a mine in Farmington, West Virginia, United States of America. The shift at the Farmington mine was scheduled to change at 8 a.m. But around 5:30 a.m., the first power outage hit, followed by an explosion deep within the mine. The shift had started at midnight. At that moment, inspections had already been done to authorize operations. Farmington is a small town in the state of West Virginia, in the Appalachian region. Back then, it had a population of about 500 people. This area played a significant role in both American and global coal mining for several reasons. The Appalachians are known for their vast coal reserves, which have historically been a major energy source for the United States and the world. This region holds some of the largest coal deposits in America. Coal mining has a long history in Appalachia, going back centuries. This activity played a key role in economic development and in shaping the identity of local communities. Coal mining is a major economic activity throughout the area of Appalachia, creating jobs and providing income for all the surrounding communities. Many towns and villages in the region rely on mining as their main source of economic livelihood. What people may not realize is the serious safety challenges concerning the miners' activities. Sometimes I think turning on the air conditioning or taking a hot shower shouldn't come at such a cost. Coal mining after World War II, around 1968, was at its peak. In the recent decades, with the global shift toward cleaner, renewable energy sources, coal's importance in Appalachia has been declining. Still, the region continues to play a role in supplying coal for both domestic and international markets. Life in Farmington was peaceful. Mountains, fishing, and church. The miners used to say the greatest threat in the region was the mountain itself, if it ever turned against the men who dared enter it. The mine involved in the Farmington disaster was Consol Number 9 mine. It was founded in 1902, so by the time that the accident occurred in 1968, the mine was 66 years old. And considering the lifespan of a mine like that, it could have lasted up to 100 years. It was located in the Farmington and Mannington areas, in the western part of West Virginia. The mine employed 320 workers and spanned thousands of square feet. It was essentially an underground mine, producing 2 million tons of coal per year. Records show that the mine had 6 main wings, laid out in a multi-compartment, complex system within the Pittsburgh Coal Seam, more than 300 feet below the surface. By the year of 1968, the mine had already seen 3 major accidents. In 1954, 1958, and 1965. At the Farmington mine, the workforce was a mix of highly experienced miners and newcomers. Their wages could range from $28 to as much as $33 per day. While some of them were just starting their careers in mining, many were men with decades of experience in coal mining. They were deeply familiar with coal mining safety practices and with the risks involved. Among them was the father of Joe Magna, Emilio Magna, who worked as a session boss.
My name is Joe Magna. My dad had 30 years in the coal mines, and he was 48 years old.
Emilio had come to America from Italy with his family when he was just 3 years old. Like many European immigrants, he began extracting coal from beneath the surface of West Virginia at a young age, just 14 years old. That night, Emilio went down into the mine in high spirits. He was truly happy. It was going to be his final day working underground. The 48-year-old Italian immigrant was celebrating with his family because that coming Saturday they would open their own gas station. From then on, his work would be above ground under the sun. His son, Joe, tried to persuade him, but he remained true to his word. He said he needed to finish his job the same way he had started it.
So he took me up to my buddy's house to stay all night, and I told him, I said, don't go to work and we'll go trout fishing. Well, he said, no, I owe them that much. So he told me, probably the first time in my life, he said, be good, don't get in trouble, I love you, and I'll see you tomorrow.
That Wednesday, November 20th, 1968, a day forever scarred in the workplace safety history, Emilio and 98 other men went down into the mine for the night shift. The temperature was below freezing. Humidity and barometric pressure were low, and the wind just kept blowing.
Since it was November, a time of extreme cold in the region where the mine is located, changes in gas behavior is expected in this type of cold environment, especially methane and carbon monoxide, which are commonly present in these conditions. With the low temperatures combined with reduced atmospheric pressure, these gases become denser, slowing down their circulation. This is why it's absolutely necessary to have exhaust systems running to ensure safe working conditions inside the mine, preventing gases from building up, which could lead to a major explosion in the event of ignition.
My name is Sharon Clellan. Maiden name was Cartwright. And my daddy was David Cartwright, and he was killed in the number 9 mine explosion. There were 5 of us. The oldest was 10, and the youngest was 11 months. The night that this happened, Daddy didn't even want to go to work that night. He was sick, wasn't feeling very well. And my mom kept counting, David, you don't want to go to work, don't go to work. And he said, but if I don't go to work, it don't put food on the table for my children. And so when Mom went to bed, we could hear her praying, keep your hand on David, keep him safe, bring him home to us again.
While the miners worked, their families slept. A mechanic was called in urgently to fix an electrical issue. There was a brief power outage, which quickly came back on. However, on the west side of the mine, no one was responding on the radio. The lights began to flicker, and the mine started to shake. Emilio and his fellow workers unfortunately had no idea what awaited them deep inside the mine in that very cold morning.
I think it was around, must have been 7 o'clock, something like that. Danny's mom hollered up and said, "Where does your dad work?" And I said, "Farmington number 9. And she said, "It blew up."
All evidence suggests that the first shaking around 5:30 a.m. was the beginning of a series of explosions that would follow that day in the Farmington underground mining complex. The Farmington blasts were especially intense due to a large buildup of flammable gases that had accumulated in the mine's tunnels.
Methane released during coal extraction is an inherent part of the process, as this gas is trapped in fissures and pores inside the rock. As the mining advances, methane is released, creating an explosive atmosphere inside the mine. When combined with coal dust, also naturally produced during coal extraction, they create tiny particles. This leads to an environment that requires even great caution from the professionals working inside it.
At the time of the explosion, the mine was releasing 8 million cubic feet of methane every 24 hours, more than double the rate in the first incident in 1954. Residents have reported hearing the blast from miles and miles away, alerting locals and people in nearby towns to the massive tragedy that was unfolding inside the mine.
It was about 8 o'clock when us kids started getting up. We seen Mom, and she was sitting at the table drinking her coffee, but yet crying. And Kathy, the oldest one, asked her, "Mom, what's wrong?" And she said, "I just received word from our pastor," it was our pastor's husband, in regards to an explosion at the mines in which Dad was in. And I was Daddy's girl. I'm the middle child. I was Daddy's girl. And I'm like, okay, but Daddy's coming home. He'll be home. And hours went by and still nothing. Seeing him on Sundays, he would go to a radio station and he would always sing on the radio station, and he took my oldest sister, and then finally I was 3 years old, and I kept saying, "Daddy, please take me, please take me." He said, "No, you'll never do it, no." And then finally this Sunday morning, Mom says, "Just take her. If she doesn't do it, don't take her no more." And that's where I begun singing at. Because my daddy took me to this radio station, and we did sing. And I don't know if you guys, if anyone is familiar with the song, "He Touched Me," but my uncle has the last tape of me singing that song, "He Touched Me." And what a joy it was to be able to sing with my daddy, and now not be able to.
Explosions in coal mines can generate shock waves that travel long distances and cause noticeable ground vibrations. The explosions at Mine 9 sent a smoke plume over 150 feet into the air from the mine entrance. One of those blasts was captured in an iconic photograph by a Charleston Gazette photographer, Lawrence Pierce. It It's easy to imagine that in the city of Farmington, everyone had some kind of connection to Mine Number 9. A father, a brother, an uncle, a grandfather, a nephew. Everyone knew someone who worked there. And that was the story of Paul, one of the youngest miners working that night. He had married while still in high school to a girl who lived near the mine.
My name's Judy Snyder Henderson Kuhn. I grew up in this area, just across the hill from Farmington Number 9 mine that exploded in November 20, 1968. I can tell you that the Number 9 mine was the big employer of the area, so of course everybody went to work there. And although it was a big employer, it was not particularly safe.
When word of the accident spread, the miners' families rushed to the mine headquarters to get news about their loved ones.
It was a store. It was a company store. So everybody gathered there, and we stood outside, frigid cold. Oh man, was it cold. The state police was driving back and forth. People was gathering. We seen some of the rescue team coming on the slope on a man trip. We waited inside for somebody to tell us something, which nobody did, because they didn't know anything. One of the constables made a statement that the rats are probably eating the bodies. Yeah. So that didn't go well with me. So I did something about it. Anyhow, a couple of state troopers were friends of mine, and they put me in the car and told me, okay, get out, go home, be good. So I did. Went home and still waiting and waiting and waiting. It was, never heard hardly anything.
Many miners' children spent the day at school, anxious and without any updates about their fathers. One of them was 14-year-old James Matish. He was told about the explosion by his mother and the school principal. James, despite deeply worried about his father, chose to stay at school that day. To his dad, education always came first, and James wanted to honor that.
My earliest memory of the explosion that morning was about 5:20. I was in a deep sleep, and all of a sudden I just felt my whole body shake. And I looked at the clock, and it was about 5:20. And I was finishing a dream in my mind where there were men in the mines. And one of them was yelling, "Fire in the hole, fire in the hole, fire in the hole." And next thing you know, there was this huge explosion. And everything just lit up, and then it went dark. And I don't know why that was on my mind, other than the fact that my dad had been injured in the mines a few weeks before that. And my mom and him were talking as I was going to sleep. And we lived in a small coal mining camp, so the houses were small. And even though I was in a different room, I could hear them talking. And she was telling him that he needed not to go to work this evening. And he said, well, we've got a son we've got to raise, and want to make sure he gets an education and does something with his life. And she continued to insist that he not go to work that evening. But he said, no, he said, I'll think about what you're saying. That morning we got ready, went to school, went about my morning, went to class. And I believe it was I think it was the second period, I got called out of class by the assistant principal, or maybe it was the principal at the time. And when I went out in the hallway, I saw my mom, and she was there crying. And she told me, what had happened and stuff, and asked if I wanted to go to the mines and wait. And I didn't like to miss class because I would get behind. And she told me it was fine for me to stay there. And that she would get in touch with me if anything changed.
The rescue teams faced extreme difficulty accessing mine number 9. Inside the mine, there was structural instabilities due to fires and blasts, and toxic gases were still present. All of this made rescue efforts very dangerous.
How many workers?
I want to say there were seven sections that were working that evening.
And when you talk about the evening starts midnight?
Right.
Midnight?
Yeah.
Okay. And the explosion starts 5:30?
Right.
A total of 21 miners managed to escape Mine 9 alive that day. Most of them pulled up by a crane that lowered a bucket into one of the mine shafts.
So they brought the bucket in to drop down and lacked 20 feet of reaching them. They had to pull it back up, go to Fairmont Supply to get more cable and put on. Meanwhile, there's more explosions happening. Guys passed out. They finally got the cable in. I just couldn't imagine what them guys went through, and we was hoping that my dad was one that was coming out, but it didn't happen.
24 hours after the explosions, the tragedy was already making headlines in major national and international newspapers. In Farmington, that day, no children went to school. All 12 county schools were closed. The New York Times published a report detailing the mine's infamous history of safety violations. The president of the United Mine Workers of America, Tony Boyle, held a press conference and promised to fight for stronger safety regulations for mine workers.
There were many news reporters there, magazine people. This was the first time I've ever known that to happen. I have all the newspapers with the pictures, everything. That's the biggest thing that I've ever known to happen.
Remember the press. Remember the press. And how they would write stories and they would twist stories and not really tell the truth because it didn't sell papers, is what I was ultimately able to conclude. That was unbelievable. The pastor's husband, that he came and the morning of the explosion, he came and told Mom about the explosion. And every couple days he would come and update my mom. She really never got no notification from the mines itself pertaining that our dad was never coming home. It came from the pastor's husband. Yeah, it was just like she was out in left field somewhere and no one cared. And it was sad seeing our mom cry herself at night and pray at night, knowing deep down inside, she knew deep down inside he was never coming home.
Methodist Church, on the morning of the second day, mothers and children gathered to pray. Meanwhile, the fire in the mine was out of control. The only way to manage the risk was to cut off the oxygen supply. So they decided to seal 2 of the mine shafts with 16-ton steel plates. At the mine site, people held vigil while Red Cross workers served them hot drinks. Meanwhile, at the company store downtown, they began issuing emergency paychecks to the families.
Ordeal, we were all told that we needed to gather at the small church that was down below the hill. And so we all gathered there. And I want to say, you probably had, 70 some wives. You probably had, if the number stands right in my head, it was maybe like 250 or 350 children. And everyone gathered in that small church. And it was something that you never, ever want to experience, to have that many people in one place at one time being told that the 78 men that were trapped in the mines were being left there for dead. It was horrendous. The yelling, the screaming, the wailing, just something that you just can't comprehend.
By the end of the second day, the mine was still burning. The ventilation shafts were shooting flames more than 100 feet into the air. By the evening, the company had confirmed the names of 78 missing miners. The early hours of day 3 began with a powerful explosion. A 1,000-gallon tank was blasted into the air. The breeze from the blast was found nearly a kilometer away.
We looked outside, and Mom said that she looked outside, and then, of course, we went to go look. And she said the sky was a reddish-orange color. And she said she knew, and deep down in her heart, Dad was never coming back home.
A coal mine is made of several interconnected tunnels. In an explosion scenario like the one that happened on this accident, it is expected that some fire will grow in magnitude and spread throughout the mine. On top of that, the structural integrity becomes compromised, which makes any rescue operation extremely difficult, from putting out the fire to retrieving the victims away from the site.
At that point, some hard decisions began to surface. Given the severity of the situation, rescuers had to face a moral dilemma. Should they continue risking their lives to search for miners, or should they call off the operation? In addition, day 3 brought devastating news. The air quality samples that were taken inside the mine showed that the atmosphere could no longer sustain life due to the high levels of carbon dioxide and methane. The only section of the mine where air quality samples came back positive was the east wing, the one area that had not been hit by the explosions. Families remained in vigil at the church. The schools reopened, but some children didn't return. Some even refused to eat.
But to kiss your father goodnight, hoping he'd come home. Oh, and that was something else too. I always said I was Daddy's girl. I wouldn't even eat breakfast until my dad got home. I don't completely remember, but Kathy said that it was several weeks before I ever ate breakfast.
There was a cloud of sadness over Farmington. While some held out hope that the missing miners would be rescued alive, others began to accept it as part of the harsh reality of the profession. The truth for miners at mine number 9 was this. The mine was in its worst condition ever, and coal dust reached up to their knees. The lack of a proper ventilation system could be blamed on several factors, including, for example, poor maintenance. You can even have a ventilation system installed, but if corrective and preventive maintenance isn't done properly, that system will quickly deteriorate and fail to work effectively. Another factor was the absence of adequate regulations. Some companies operate without proper systems in place and ignoring key parameters for a safe ventilation. It can also be due to a lack of awareness. What's the actual risk, the danger or not of having a proper ventilation system? And of course, there's the issue of investment, the safe conditions needed for operation. These elements must be prioritized. Who's in charge of that? What are the most critical investments we need to make to ensure safety, well-being, and ultimately productivity inside the mine?
And I remember him the weekend before the explosion, talking and saying how the conditions in the mine had changed and deteriorated, and there wasn't enough rock dust, that they were working in coal dust knee deep, and that he was afraid that the mine was going to explode.
But if they would have just listened to the men, that it was bad down there and they couldn't hardly breathe, they couldn't hardly function. If they weren't so dead set on meeting quotas, you know, Dad said they had quotas they had to meet. They had to go so far every night. If they weren't worrying about that and worried more about the safety, then I don't believe this would have ever happened.
On this day, crews began sealing some shafts and opening 2 new ones, closer to the area where miners might still be located. The company held a press briefing and spoke about the new drilling operations, but the slow progress frustrated many who asked, "You're not trying harder because you think no one's left alive, aren't you? You have to try. My brother is in there. We know he's alive. You guys need to make contact." The company simply replied, "There's a limit to what we can do."
The waiting was terrible. You think you've got it bad, but you look at another family that had, I think it was 14 or 16 kids. How in the world? That woman, I mean, she had her way to heaven way before anybody even thought about it, to have that many kids.
And in the evenings, I would end up going to the mines. And when I say going to the mines, it was actually a little company store that was located where the slope entry was to the mines. And everyone would gather there, and we would wait for briefings from mine workers, from Consol, from whoever had information that they were going to give. And we would wait in earnest for them to give information to us. None of the information that came out was ever good. It was always, bad news, it seemed like. Really wasn't much hope at that point in time.
And at that point in time, the company responsible for Mine Number 9 could no longer do anything to ensure the miners would be rescued alive. But there were, in fact, several measures that could have been taken earlier to prevent a disaster like this from happening. The accident in 1968 was not the company's first major tragedy. Over the years, many warning signs were ignored. And those miners, they knew they were working under extremely dangerous conditions.
In conditions of extreme cold outside the mine, when the ventilation system stops working, some warning signs become quite clear. We typically see rising temperatures inside the mine, people struggling to breathe because the air gets denser, and a rather noticeable increase in airborne dust.
When the miners saw the first power outage on the day of the accident, they didn't realize how serious it was, as blackouts were very common and the safety devices were frequently shut off. There was too much gas, not enough air, too much coal dust, and very little rock dust. They fought tirelessly against the dust that coated the machines and equipment.
But what we found out, my husband didn't always tell me,
And I know some of the others didn't either, but when there was a bad time going on in the mines, you know, if the air was bad or if the fan was down and they were walking out, they didn't always tell you because they didn't want you to worry. But I found out after the fact that the fan in the mine had been down that night and nobody warned them. And so the gas spilled up and it exploded.
It's important to point out that 4 months before the accident, one of the miners' compressants caught fire. Inspectors overlooked non-compliance issues and safety hazards. The miners asked for help from unions, supervisors, and even state mining officials. In 1967, 3 inspections were carried out, and they had already flagged the issue of accumulated coal dust. In 1968, before the explosion, inspections revealed the exact same situation. 19 days before the disaster, another inspection reported the same risks, including the threat of fire due to methane buildup.
Told us that they were going to blow the top of the mountain off because they're not rock dusting, they're not maintaining ventilation, the stoppings are back, and he was really worried.
The dust inside the mine was sometimes so thick that miners couldn't even see one another. When they raised concerns to their supervisors, they were often met with, "If things are happening the way you're telling me, then someone isn't doing their job." So the miners would ask themselves, what do our leaders actually believe their job is? They also filed reports with the safety committee, but almost nothing ever changed. Those miners were able to predict their own deaths before November 1968. Company President John Corcoran issued a statement that day promising the mine would not be sealed as long as there was any chance someone inside might still be alive. 2 inspections were conducted, but they brought little information and almost no hope to the miners' families. Some relatives refused to go back home and chose to sleep in the church instead. The lingering question was, why didn't the miners make it out? There are several reasons we can point to explain why it was so hard for miners to evacuate in the first moments after the explosion. The fire that spread very quickly, the lack of warnings and early alerts, and the thick, dark smoke that filled the space. There were also the narrow, maze-like tunnels, and of course, the panic, the despair brought on by the emergency. These are just some of the potential reasons why evacuating the mine proved so difficult for those miners. At the start of day 6, air sample results revealed that the mine's atmosphere could no longer sustain life. Near the area where those samples were taken, it was believed that 2 to 3 mining teams were located.
In a fire of such a scale as that, one that burns for several days, conditions for sustaining life start to become increasingly unfavorable. The fire itself consumes the oxygen in the mine's tunnels. It also produces large amounts of carbon monoxide, a gas that's toxic to humans, and extreme heat only adds to the danger, making survival even less likely in situations like this. Also, on top of all that, those explosions that continue over a long time naturally begin to damage the mine's structural integrity. In this case, collapses were even felt on the surface. That would have made the possibility of survivors extremely unlikely.
That day, they also used a high-precision microphone, capable of picking up a whisper from 100 feet away, but the only sound it captured was the water dripping. These triggered a wave of support efforts for the families.
They sent cards, they sent letters, I still have them, that people sent and wrote really nice things in. Some people sent money. There was a lot of money that was sent into the town of Farmington that we never saw. We're not sure exactly where that went.
But I mean, they sent, people sent food, they sent stuff for the kids, because it was close to Christmas time. And a lot of people just, they wrote a lot of cards and letters. Everybody got them.
Rescue teams received many suggestions on how to reach the miners, but none of them were considered viable. One man claimed to have had a vision and knew exactly where the miners were. He asked to be put on a plane. Other miners from nearby sites refused to go into the mine that tragic day, saying it wasn't safe. They said they wouldn't go back until the mine was treated with rock dust. That day, the air quality samples confirmed that the air was poisonous, and there was no way anyone could survive in those conditions. The microphones and phones that were lowered into the shafts were not picking up any signals.
And a lot of the holes that they drilled and dropped the mics down, they melted. That's how hot the mines was.
Media coverage was constant. That same day in Washington, a press conference was held, sparking a strong reaction across the US and Canada. People said the law was terribly weak and protected only corporate interests. And the miners said they always knew exactly when the federal and state inspectors would be visiting the mines they worked in. Without a doubt, certain measures, if they had been implemented, could have prevented the accident. Starting with lessons learned from the past. Mine number 9 had a history of 3 major accidents that occurred before 1968. If the lessons from those events had been applied, we wouldn't be telling the story today. We should also talk about proper ventilation systems, gas monitoring, and truly managing hazards and risks so we can create a safe, workable condition underground. Leadership and safety, leaders who value active listening, who observe, who act, who create not only a safe workplace, but a place where people feel safe to speak up, a strong safety culture among everyone involved, every single person involved. Without a doubt, that alone could turn mine number 9 into a zero accident environment where people can go to work and come home whole, safe, and sound. At the end of day 7, another explosion occurred. And with every new blast, the people of Farmington lost a little more hope of finding their miners alive. Day 8 was the day before Thanksgiving. That day, the alarm sounded for 20 minutes, and microphones were once again lowered into the shafts. There was no response. Just the sound of water dripping. The governor of West Virginia came to Farmington to show his support. That day, Thanksgiving baskets were handed out to the families. Some of them, they refused to accept the baskets. And one wife, she said, "Do you know what I want? I want to hear voices. I want God to give us a sign." Meanwhile, air quality samples from inside the mine continued to show the air was poisonous, incompatible with life. To answer that question, we need to go back to a previous accident that happened before the 1968 one, an accident that happened in 1954. After that event, it became clear that the miners were afraid to speak out the safety conditions they were exposed to. Also, miners were paid bonuses for productivity. And if you brought up anything about unsafe working conditions, if you filed a complaint, you'd be reassigned to a dirtier, more isolated, and more punishing job. All of these created a culture of fear of speaking up, fear of retaliation, and ultimately the fear of losing one's job. So it was very common to see shift reports marking the conditions as safe enough for miners to enter and work. Everything looked fine on paper. Records from 1967 show that out of 5,400 active coal mines in the country, 82% had issues with safety violations.
And I'm not sure the company cares about anything other than the money. You got to produce the coal. They'll push you to your limit to produce the coal so they can get their money. And of course, people have to live.
It's worth emphasizing the importance of protecting workers' rights and promoting a true culture of safety, where not only is it safe to do your job, but it's also safe to talk about the safety conditions that you're working under. And to be able to build these strong and mature safety culture, we need to establish these accessible channels where people can freely express their concerns and needs. Beyond that, we need to implement non-retaliation policies so that communication can be reliable, transparent, and really efficient in terms of promoting real change regarding the safety needs. And lastly, protect health, protect safety, and ensure well-being in the workplace. The Mine 9 disaster highlights the critical importance of implementing strong safety measures and emergency readiness in high-risk environments like the coal mines. It was Thanksgiving Day. While the rest of the country gathered around dinner tables with families to give thanks for their blessings, the families of more than 70 miners were living in absolute despair. At the company headquarters, they held a dinner, but most of the miners' families stayed home. Instead, a church service was held. Some people asked, "Why is God doing this?" On that terrible Thanksgiving morning, another explosion rocked Mine 9, and new samples confirmed that the air inside the mine was poisonous. Rumors began to spread that the company was going to seal the mine. 18 men, among them federal and state officials, company representatives, and union leaders, met to discuss the situation. It was the worst Thanksgiving in Farmington's history. Yes, it was possible to identify that at the time the role of safety professionals was in development. There were already courses, some of them specifically focused on safety and mining, but they were less comprehensive. There was growing awareness about the importance of the subject. Some companies were even beginning to hire safety professionals in order to help them manage the risks. It was a time of transition. In short, this movement for hiring and developing had started, but there were still many opportunities for improvement. The air inside the mine was toxic, and even if the workers had survived the 20 major explosions and the many smaller ones that happened, they would have eventually run out of air. So, sadly, at that point, the only option left to actually manage the danger was to seal the mine.
And of course, the issue that you had at the time was, well, if they were still trying to get air into the mines for the miners, are you then fanning the flames from the explosions and creating, a worse situation that caused it to continue to boil up all those times? I mean, normally if there's an explosion, from what I've heard, there's an explosion and that's basically it. This one continued to churn and burn and blow up.
Thus, on day number 10, families were called to the church. There, company president John Corcoran made a formal statement confirming what everyone feared. There was no way to reach the men. There was no chance that the men were alive. There was no other choice but to seal the mine. He said in his speech that this decision had been agreed upon by state and federal agencies, thereby sharing some of the accountability. There was a lot of weeping. Some asked him, "Do you think you're God?" Soon after, 90 trucks arrived, carrying 1,600 tons of rock. Those were dumped with 1,000 tons of limestone into the shafts where the first explosions had occurred, and into the hearts of every person in Farmington that day.
So that they finally had to seal it. And when they sealed it, it was all over them. There was no hope for anybody to come out, and they pulled the plug. And that was the end of it. I told my sisters and my mom, I said, it's the deepest grave we'll ever see.
For many years, I blamed God for this, which is normal with us kids, and stuff, even though, we know it's not God's fault. Growing up is one of the hardest things anyone could ever do without a dad. We've missed out on so much when it comes to having your dad by your side. So much. A lot of women went on with their lives, but yet there was a few that didn't, or several, I'm sure. But they went on with their lives. They found other spouses, and, got married, had more children, and so forth. But there was no one else for my mom, no one else other for my mom but my dad. And with that, it was a struggle. A lot of times, we got what we needed, not what we wanted.
The pain spread across the coal mines. It was the death of hope. The day broke colder and grayer. In churches, pastors preached forgiveness. At the White House, demands were made for new laws. Some people in Farmington said there will be no Christmas, no holiday, not until the mine is opened again. That day marked the beginning of the investigation into the Mine Number 9 accident. 84 witnesses were summoned. However, only 47 appeared for the hearings, which lasted 3 days. Among them was the foreman, who handed off the shift but didn't sign or fill out the shift report before leaving the mine. It was discovered that inspections on preparedness and response systems were done on Sundays by just 2 mine employees over the course of 4 hours, something nearly impossible given that the mine spanned 8.5 square miles. This became evident throughout the investigation, interviews, and testimonials, because it was impossible to perform such inspections safely under those conditions. It was revealed during the investigation that the ventilation system had been damaged and compromised for years.
I don't know that they'll ever know for sure, but I do know that there were reports of the ventilation system having gone down and it being ignored, the miners having to walk out of the mines because the fan system, there was device called the Femco alarm system that was supposed to set off alarms in the bathhouse and maybe elsewhere to let people in authority know that the fan was down, that when the fan goes down, the ventilation's messed up in the mines. And as a consequence, it's not safe for the men to be in there working. And there was some evidence that was uncovered at some point in time that established that there had been a set of jumper cables used to bypass the Femco alarm system so that the alarm was not sounding. And if the alarm was sounding after so long, as I understand it, then the power would shut down in the mines, and that would cause the men to have to walk out.
And that's what happened. We know that's what happened, but we didn't learn this in time for our lawsuits to do any good. They told us the statute of limitations had run out. And so the guys were never really held responsible for it. We did have the opportunity, if you want to call it that, to see one of the electricians. He lived in Fairmont, and when we found out who it was, there were about 4 or 5 of us that went knocking on his door. And we asked him, please tell us who told you to do that? Why did you do that? Just trying to ask him questions. Of course, he was crazy because he didn't like the idea that everybody knew that. And he said, just don't worry about it. He said, it's all over with and done. He said, just don't worry about it. Just go on. And we're like, you're telling us to just forget him and just go on when you did this? You need to tell us. And he just was very adamant he wouldn't. You could tell he was very upset that somebody knew, but he never told.
The survivors of this tragedy, they refused to call it an accident, since no preventive or control measures were taken before the disaster occurred.
But I do not feel it was an accident. I feel that it was all about the mighty dollar and not about the men, the workers. And I'll go to my grave believing that it was, I shouldn't say this, but to me it was just murder. They killed these 78 men because they wouldn't listen.
I don't believe that there's such a thing as an accident in the mines. It's self-made. If you stop, look, listen, and think, it won't happen. Everything is man-made. Everything is man-made. If stoppings are back, the ventilation ain't up. If you don't have enough mean air going around the miner.
Just to think, if he had had the proper gear, the proper ventilation, I could possibly have had my daddy. My family would have had our daddy. Wouldn't have had to struggle like we did.
Gary Martin, he was one of the guys in the bucket, the last ones to come out. I said, Gary, what do you actually think happened? And he looked at me, he said, murder 178 times.
To this day, people still speculate about where the first explosion actually began on November 20th. Despite all the facts and the data that were uncovered during the investigation, none of them brought the miners back. But it certainly helped prevent disasters like this from happening again. The investigation was closed many years ago. What remains open is November 20th, 1968. That day remains open to every family member because when a worker goes to work and doesn't return home, that day never ends. It never truly ends.
So you need to know this, ladies, that if you have a man in there and something like this happens, It never ends. It never ends. So you have to back them. You have to tell them, come on, guys, let's try to straighten this up because we can't let them do this to us. Because your life will never be the same. And your kids will pay for it so that nobody forgets. Because if they forget, it'll happen again. So that's an important thing, that people remember that these kind of things happen to everyone and that they should be real careful with reporting things. If you see something's going wrong, report it. I mean, don't take that chance.
You relive that over and over and over again in your mind. And the thing was, you never had the closure that you would expect when someone in your family, passes away.
Like I said, it still hangs with you. There's no closure, okay? There's no closure.
Today, at the site of the explosion of the mine, there is a memorial. And that memorial is not just a place for paying respect. It stands there to remind all of us that life is non-negotiable, that jobs can always be replaced, but people never. If the families of the victims found any peace, it was in making mining safer for thousands of others. To tell this story is not just to tell something that ruined many lives. It's also to tell something that saved many lives. Since 1 year later, the U.S. Congress passed the landmark Federal Coal Mine Health and Safety Act. This tragedy revealed the deep challenges in safety culture. Challenges driven by production pressure and incentive pay based on output, lack of oversight and proper regulations, lack of real risk management inside the mine, and resources prioritized to other ends. And that place was more than an unsafe place to work. It was an unsafe place to speak up. Those miners were under constant threat, torn between survival and how will I provide for my family? Families claimed they could identify the risks, but they were afraid. And something that we must highlight here is that we can't wait for a tragedy to pinpoint the causes and contributing factors. It's easy to point fingers once the investigation is complete, but what we need today is empowerment for building a safety culture. A culture that shows up in every choice, every decision, every action, every habit. Starting with the leadership, leaders who set the example, leaders who influence, leaders who step in long before the accident happens. But the most important question is how to build a strong safety culture, an evolved culture, one that focuses on anticipation, one that focuses on preventing accidents. And to paraphrase Peter Drucker, we need to say that culture eats strategy for breakfast. A culture based on action, not theory, on practice, not theory. A culture that goes beyond how I wish things were and reflects how things actually are. A culture that aligns what I believe with what I refuse to compromise. These are the principles that evolve over time. They are responsible for pointing us towards levels of maturity, starting at the pathological level where there is denial of safety culture, then a reactive level where we respond only after the incidents occur, then a calculative level where we all become the rule followers that follow checklists and procedures, then a proactive level, an independent level where we hold accountability, where we understand safety starts with us. That safety isn't just in the safety departments and the protocols. Safety begins with me. I become the owner of safety measures. I embody the safety measures. It stops being something that I see on a wall poster on my workplace and becomes part of who I am. And that culture continues to evolve to a sustainable level, which is best defined as a genuine passion for continuous improvement. We all want a strong safety culture. But before we can define the direction, we need to understand where we are. Understand what is your current maturity level. Face those challenges, and from there, ultimately develop a true path to safety excellency. And how does a safety culture reveals itself to us? More than just looking at numbers to define a strong culture of safety. What we really need is to look at those people coming back home every day, whole, safe, and sound. That is without a doubt the best definition of a strong safety culture. One that shows up before the task begins. It reaches the individual. It enables that person to engage in safety discussions, to bring safety into every activity he or she carries out. Because the next job can't be the last one. If you asked me, where is safety? I would tell you, it's in every arm. In every dream we pursue through our work. The mission of safety spans generations, and it becomes real when we make it home.